Okay, does anyone have anything they'd like to share, comment on, or ask any questions this morning?
Yeah, so I was, been playing with connecting to spaciousness and light, and been feeling like things wanting to release out of my system. And then I realized there's so there was things that were distracting me, like kind of like a feeling of negative emotions and things like that. And then some part of me thought to bring in more gratitude, and did that. And then it was interesting. It was like a kind of like a mental switch, and felt like it was super helpful. So it's kind of like, duh, that's a good idea to come from a place of gratitude. But it felt a little forced at first, and I realized I've been kind of going for less willpower, in general. And so when I made the switch, it felt almost like willpower, but then it worked. And so that was kind of interesting to me, because kind of like that play between naturalness and following your inclinations. Then I realized it's kind of like it was an inclination to do that, but it wasn't one that I typically identify with, and so I would have missed it because of that. And so that was just, I don't know if I had anything to ask about it, but it was just kind of interesting to me that there was an association of doing that with using willpower, because the other sensations were easier for me to follow. But then when I did, it was super helpful, and it kind of like, I'm guessing it was the light that I needed within the spaciousness to help things to flow. So anyway, just wanted to share that and see if you had any comments on it, or any
Insights
anything
on
else
it.
to add. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. If I'm not mistaken, at the heart of the question, at the center of the question, is really the question of what does it really mean to not use your willpower and follow what you want, because you just had this experience where you didn't want to do something, you did it, and it felt like you were kind of forcing yourself a bit. But then at the same time, at the end, it actually ended up what you really wanted, and it also worked. And so, what gives? It seems like it's a question.
Yeah. That was really well captured. Thank you.
Okay, welcome. Okay, so what we want, it's easy to say, but is a study for precisely the reason that you just mentioned. And the reason I say that is because, it's kind of like what we want is to, let's say, for instance, be vulnerable. Let's say, for instance, we don't want to cry. But then we cry, and then we realize that that's actually what we've been wanting. When we feel the release, and then and so what I'd like to say is that what we're actually struggling with is not with what we want, but the perception of what we want, and not understanding what we really want, because we're confusing strategy with what we want. So let me give you an example, and let me explain, what the role of willpower is, what we call willpower, and and what it means to use your willpower, and what it means to not use your power. And probably the distinction will be helpful. So, and it's actually a bit of a study, if you will. So The first place I want to start with is that, as I said, with strategy and with what we want. And if you want to say what you really want has to be defined by what your need is, meaning as in what's going on in your system. So when people don't want to cry, the reason is that they don't want to look bad. They don't want to look weak in general. Not all of them, but I'm going to just give that example because I think people can relate to that. They don't want to lose face. They don't want to be treated as lesser. And the reason they don't want that judgment is because they want oneness. They want to connect. And most likely if they're crying, it's because they're feeling, probably, let's say for instance, in general, it's because people want to actually feel not alone in whatever it is that they're going through. They want to feel oneness, or I think another way to say this, like emotional support or understanding. But it all comes through the experience of feeling oneness, feeling union, feeling harmony. And, and if you don't experience that, then you have emotional congestion. It's kind of like, it's a very definition of love, union versus the separation, And so you are not wanting to cry because you don't want to be separated, ironically. But the conundrum is that if you don't cry, you don't actually have a genuine emotion. And actually, if you look at how human nature works, and if you study, one of the key things that shows is that you can't really have a union unless you feel you're vulnerable, meaning as in you actually show your emotions honestly and genuinely or authentically of what's going on, because authentic connection is actually done by connecting from emotion to emotion. And so we have, when we're growing up, experiences where you cry and then being rejected or being corrected for it or being told that that's inappropriate, because probably whoever, we were with, and, I feel like we all actually have that experience. I remember being told as a, boy, the equivalent of boys don't cry, right? I mean, and the people who told me that, they meant well. They, they wanted to make sure that I wouldn't get rejected when I grew up. And so they told me the best strategy they could, right? And that's actually true. It's like there are some instances where probably there's a place to be vulnerable and there's a place not to be vulnerable. And Brene Brown talks about that and the power of vulnerability. It's just makes some really good distinctions there. But anyways, so we don't want to experience separation, so we try not cry, right? But then we cry, and then we are emotionally vulnerable, and oftentimes actually people relate to that and they feel your emotions, and then it's not uncommon that you feel better after you cry. And then also, not only do you have emotional release, but you find out that actually people do care for you. And so you cry, and all of a sudden, all your needs are getting met. So your need was union, and not crying was a strategy to try and not be rejected so that you have a chance at union. And then you end up crying, and then you experience union, and then you feel better, even though you were afraid to do the very thing that you were afraid was going to have you not have your needs met. So in this example, we can see that it really is about needs being met. And when we are in conflict, what that shows is that our strategy is in conflict with our needs getting met. And that's where a lot of the confusion comes in. And so a lot of times, let's say, for instance, people don't want to use gratitude because it feels inauthentic. So they want to feel better, but it's kind of a matter of priority. They don't want to feel better by being inauthentic. And if you're inauthentic about gratitude, it's also ineffective. So we also have the experience of it being ineffective. And a lot of people actually have tried gratitudes and had it not work necessarily. And the reason is because of inauthenticity. It's like when you're being grateful about something, like say for example, I'm grateful that, I have a job, or like, it's like, you just kind of go through it, through the things that you should be grateful for, but you're not feeling it, right?
Yeah, it's very close, the experience.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
So, so we have that experience, and then we also are afraid that if we become grateful and we're just happy, the need that was not being met will never be met. That's the other fear that we have. So, it's kind of, so we want to actually stay miserable because we have this fear that if we just become happy, then what happens to the emotion, the bad emotion we were feeling because our need was not being met? Kind of almost feels like negligence. It's almost like, like a baby's crying and you just ignore the baby and you're happy, and then the baby will never be fed. Kind of is like the feeling. So we were actually, so authenticity, the reason we prize authenticity, another way to say that we prize authenticity is that we're afraid to turn away from taking care of what feels bad and just be grateful, because we're afraid that we're going to ignore our needs forever, and we're actually secretly going to be really unhappy and miserable because we're too busy pretending being happy. It's kind of like you're superficially happy, but really deep down you're unhappy. And so, kind of a lot of people associate gratitude practice with that, like the more important needs in their life not being met, and the actual thing that's making them miserable, that thing never being resolved. So, one of the reasons why people focus so much on staying miserable, for good reason, right? So it has to do with needs. So needs and strategies. So the strategy is to stay miserable so that we're not going to ignore our deep needs, and therefore, make sure that we have a chance at real happiness. So that's kind of an example. So, right, so like basically, the struggle happens. So when you try, here's gonna be my guess, if it typically goes how it goes, is when you wanted to go for gratitude practice, there was a part of you that was uncertain whether, if you allowed yourself to be grateful, whether you would basically ignore your deeper needs and that would go unignored, and whether you'd be inauthentic, which is basically another way of saying, am I going to be miserable for the rest of my life because I'm going to be relying on willpower to just keep making me happy, which is a lot of effort when I'm really miserable. So there's a lot of resistance to actually gratitude for that reason, or some version of this. It's basically, kind of like, oh, my needs are not gonna be met. My deeper needs are not gonna be met if I just allow myself to be happy. So the reason we stay miserable is so we can be happy, which is ironic, but okay. So now, how does that correlate to willpower? The willpower comes in and actually trying to get ourselves to do something that we're not convinced is going to work. So let's say, for instance, if you were certain that doing the gratitude practice was going to help you be more authentic, and you had no doubt that it was actually, in your experience, going to help you get your needs met, that's not being met, that's making you miserable, and you have no doubt about it, you would actually have no willpower issue because you have no conflict within. You have no doubt, right? But it's like, but we're oftentimes not convinced. We're oftentimes mentally convinced, but we're not actually convinced in our experience. Like, it needed to have really worked for us to be convinced in our experience. But a lot of us actually don't have like full experiences and actually experiences of the gratitude practice working, or if the gratitude practice worked, we don't actually have the experience of our fundamental misery going away. So what I mean by that is that we do the gratitude practice, you feel happier, and then an hour later or two or sometime, whatever you were miserable about, you're straight back there. So it seems like the gratitude practice did not help one bit. Well, why do it? Never solved the problem. It just kind of delayed the inevitable, which is be back to being miserable, right? So the willpower comes in because it just fundamentally feels like it doesn't work. And yes, you do feel better for a short amount of time, but then so what? And so these are some of the struggles. So the willpower comes in partially because of the uncertainty that it's not going to work, or you have competing needs. Like, say for instance, that if you work out, you're going to be feeling better, but then you're feeling tired. So like now you have competing needs. Like, you don't want to do anything because you're tired, but then at the same time, you have a fairly good feeling that if you do work out, you're going to feel better. Willpower. What do you really want? And so willpower always comes in when actually in that particular moment, we are not certain what of our need is a high priority. And so this all happens because we fundamentally misunderstand something about happiness. So most of the time, we think that if we're happy, as I said, we think that what if we don't, why? There are two things that come up. Why do anything else? If we can just meditate and be happy, well, why do anything else? What's the point of doing anything else? And so, or like, maybe I'll be miserable. I'll be somewhat happy, but I won't be really happy because what I really want is not happening. So we ping pong back and forth between these things, right? But here's something we need to understand about these happiness practices and gratitude. The best analogy I can make is happiness is like the sun coming out. It just makes everything better. Like, when the sun comes out, it just makes everything more enjoyable. And you may have been doing something, and what we need to do doesn't change. The things that we need to do is always the same. You still need to brush your teeth, you still need to eat, you still need to go to work, whatever, it's the same. But when the sun is out, you just feel better. And so happiness practice, so gratitude, is actually the same. You're just changing the internal weather so that everything is just more enjoyable. You just have more energy and motivation to do things because you're happy, so you have better perspective. And so the reason you have happiness perspective is because a happiness practice is so that you have better perspective and you have a better internal weather. Now, if we understand this, then we actually get fully on board with gratitude practice because we realize it wasn't there to solve the problem, but actually it was there to really actually give us a boost so that we can have a better perspective. So that, because as if you wake up on the right side of the bed, or if the weather is really nice and the sun is shining, your perspective tends to be better. Even if something doesn't go right, you know, you still actually tend to be okay because you're enjoying the weather. It's like, you know, no, it's too bad that didn't work out, but you know what? At least the sun is out and at least the weather is enjoyable, and so on and so forth. And so that is what the gratitude practice is about. And if we understand that, then we actually don't resist gratitude practice because we understand that it's not going to solve everything, but at least the sun's going to come out and things are going to be better. Okay, hopefully that explained your conundrum between authenticity, inauthenticity, about willpower, the role of willpower and all that. You know, what we really want, what we don't.
Yeah.
And the role of gratitude practice and all of that.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was really helpful. And yeah, that answered my question. I think that was the missing piece. It's the either or thinking.
Yes, yes.
Causing the conflict, you know,
Yes.
like either I, because I've experienced, you know, like the release of negative emotions can be very pleasurable as well. It's like, you know, there's all this energy just waiting to be experienced through that.
Mhm.
But having that happen within the happiness, sunshine makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, yeah, I think so too. And if you don't, then you're gonna focus on just releasing the energy. But you know, I think I'd rather release the energy with the sun being out than not, personally.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Ken.
you're welcome. Okay, well, I'm done cleaning, so I need to scooch, but you'll have a great practice. Hope the sun will be out for you.
Thank you so much, Master Kim.
Master Ken.
You're welcome. Welcome. Okay, bye.